The lights in the studio were soft, almost too perfect. Chairs polished, water glasses full. A red cue light blinked. We're live in 3, 2, 1. The broadcast began as many do, smiles, applause, small talk. Two legends seated across from each other. Morgan Freeman, calm as ever, voice like velvet. Robert De Niro, sharp, edgy, leaning in with that familiar spark. They were invited to discuss legacy, art, what fame really means in an era of noise. But something, no one knew what yet, was simmering beneath the surface. The host asked a harmless question. "What do you think defines greatness?" De Niro started. His tone was loud, dramatic, almost performative. Freeman listened, expression unreadable. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He only said, "Greatness is how you carry yourself when no one's applauding anymore." De Niro blinked. Silence. The audience leaned forward. The smile faded from De Niro's face. And that is when everything began to shift. There's something unsettling about silence on live television. It lingers. It exposes. Morgan Freeman didn't flinch. He looked De Niro straight in the eye. Not with anger, but with something older, heavier. De Niro leaned forward. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. Freeman adjusted his suit, cleared his throat softly. "It means," he said, "some people confuse applause with approval." A single cough came from the back row. One of the crew glanced nervously at the floor manager. Was this part of the segment? The host, clearly blindsided, tried to pivot. "Gentlemen, let's keep things respectful. We're live." But the tension had already carved itself into the room. De Niro leaned back now, visibly agitated. His jaw was tight. "You want to say something, Morgan? Say it. Don't dance around it." Freeman paused, and in that pause, the energy shifted again. He looked into the camera. "I think some folks have mistaken movie scripts for morals." The audience gasped. De Niro opened his mouth, but no words came out. Not yet. The camera operator zoomed in, slowly. Not because they were told to, but because every instinct said this was a moment. Morgan Freeman sat with the calm of a man who had waited years to say what he was about to say. De Niro, on the other hand, had started shifting in his seat, fidgeting, adjusting his collar. "I've watched you," Freeman said softly, "lecture this country, actors, presidents, like you've been chosen to do so. But tell me, Bob, who chose you?" A low gasp began. A ripple moved through the crowd. The host's hands tightened around their pen. De Niro laughed, a short, bitter one. "That's rich, coming from you." Freeman didn't smile. "No, it's honest. There's a difference." The host tried again. "Let's take a quick break." Freeman spoke over them just once. "Some of us built bridges, others just walked across them like they were owed." And just like that, De Niro's face changed. The red rose in his cheeks. He leaned forward as if to speak, but the screen faded to black. "Commercial break," the producer whispered into their headset. But nobody moved. The control room had a choice: cut the feed early, or let it ride. They let it ride. The red light above camera 2 never flickered. The director whispered through the headset, "Hold, we're live." Everyone in the studio knew. This wasn't just television anymore. This was history, and it was happening in slow motion. De Niro looked away first. Not in retreat, but in calculation. He bit his lower lip, glanced at the host, then back at Freeman. "You always thought you were above it all, didn't you?" De Niro said. "Above the mess, above the business. But you took the checks, Morgan. Same as me." Freeman nodded once. Calm, measured. "And I earned mine, without pretending to be a prophet." That was the line. The one that made the audio technician's hand freeze over the fader. De Niro pointed now, anger rising. You think they love you because you're quiet? They love you because you act wise. But it's still acting. No laughter, no applause. Even the live audience seemed confused, caught between watching two giants and realizing one of them had just been cracked open. By now, phones in the audience were recording. The security team didn't stop them. No one dared move. The host, in a practiced voice, tried once more. Gentlemen, we're off topic. Let's shift to legacy. Morgan, would you? Freeman raised a single hand, not to silence, but to finish. I'll speak to legacy, he said, eyes never leaving De Niro. Legacy is the weight your name carries after you've stopped talking. The host opened their mouth, then closed it again. De Niro's hand gripped the armrest now. You think I haven't paid dues? You think I haven't earned my name? Freeman leaned in slightly. His voice dropped. You earned your name in film, but you've been trying to spend it like a currency in politics. That's not acting. That's gambling. A sharp intake of breath swept the room. One of the producers whispered, He's going off script. Another replied, So is history. And for the first time, De Niro looked unsure, his hands lowered, his mouth opened, then shut. There was a pause, a long one, and the silence felt louder than any monologue. It happened in a blink. The host gave the signal for commercial. The countdown began in the director's ear. We're out in 5, 4. But before the fade, Freeman leaned closer, not for the audience, not for the cameras, just for De Niro. And he said something no microphone was meant to catch. But one did. A backup boom mic, still hot, caught the low rasp of Freeman's voice as he looked his co-star in the eye and whispered, You don't know how to lose, Bob. That's why the world stopped clapping. The screen faded to black. The audience didn't clap. Not yet. Not when the lights dimmed. Not when the stage manager waved. People were still sitting, phones in hand, replaying what they thought they'd just heard. And in the hours to come, they'd hear it again. Clipped, looped, subtitled, debated. But in that moment, all they knew was that something real had just broken through the screen. Though the broadcast had cut, the ripple had not. In the studio, Freeman leaned back in his chair. De Niro remained still, staring, not in anger now, but in something else. Maybe confusion, maybe disbelief. The producer's voice broke the quiet. We're back in 90 seconds. The host whispered across the table. You guys okay to continue? De Niro didn't answer. Morgan simply nodded once. Behind the scenes, the control room replayed the whisper on their monitors. It was faint, but clear. You don't know how to lose, Bob. That's why the world stopped clapping. A decision had to be made. The network could mute it in the rebroadcast. Cut the mics, downplay the segment. But it was too late. A studio intern had already clipped the feed from the backup boom mic and uploaded it. 3 minutes later, it hit social media. 6 minutes later, it trended. Now the crew's phones were lighting up. Headlines appeared in real time. Morgan Freeman's quiet takedown airs uncut. De Niro confronted on live TV and doesn't respond. And the audience, still seated, sensed it. Something had left the screen and entered the world. The cameras returned. The lights flickered back. But the tone in the studio had shifted. You could feel it, like walking into a church just after a funeral. The host welcomed viewers back with a trembling smile. We're here with Morgan Freeman and Robert De Niro, two icons, two friends. No one smiled at the word friends. Freeman, usually warm, didn't project charm. He didn't deliver lines. He sat, anchored, real. I didn't come here to fight, he finally said. But I also didn't come here to pretend. The host swallowed. And, Robert? De Niro nodded slowly. Let's just finish this. But then Morgan did something no one expected. He turned, not to De Niro, but to the studio audience, to the lens, to the millions now watching, rewatching, analyzing every frame. I've played presidents, prisoners, prophets. I've said a lot of things with someone else's words. He looked into the camera. But today, those were mine. A moment passed. No soundtrack. No transition. Just a raw, unfiltered pause. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay still. So they stayed still. De Niro shifted. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the water glass. He sipped, then cleared his throat. He looked down, as if trying to remember the talking points his team prepared. But something in him hesitated. Then he spoke. "You've always had that voice, Morgan. That tone that makes everything sound like truth." Freeman didn't flinch. De Niro went on, slower now. "But just because people believe you doesn't mean you're right." The host nodded nervously. "Fair point. Let's—" Freeman cut in. "Then say what's true to you, Bob. Without a script, without the rage, say what's real." The challenge hung in the air. De Niro opened his mouth, closed it. He looked out at the crowd, not for applause, but for direction. None came. He tried again. "What's real? I gave everything to this craft, this country. And yeah, I've made noise, because silence felt like betrayal." He looked up. His voice cracked. "But maybe I forgot how to speak without shouting." No one clapped. The red light stayed on. From the outside, the studio looked the same, but inside it had become something else entirely. There were no lights changed. No props moved. Yet somehow, the air itself had shifted. Producers huddled off camera, unsure whether to wrap the segment or stretch it. The audience sat, still silent, caught between two icons, unsure who to root for. But it was the crew who were whispering now. Makeup artists, audio techs, people who had worked with both men for years. Some leaned toward De Niro, others toward Freeman. One grip muttered, "I've never seen Bob like that." Another replied, "I've never seen Morgan like that." On stage, De Niro and Freeman sat in stillness. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something deeper. The host cleared their throat. "We're going to open the floor. One question from the audience." A young woman stood, nervous, eyes wide. She asked quietly, "Do you two respect each other?" No laughter, just the question, hanging in the air. Freeman didn't answer first. De Niro did, and his voice cracked. Robert De Niro had spoken 1,000 times before crowds. He had delivered lines in front of millions. But this was different. He looked out at the young woman who asked the question. Then he turned to Freeman. Slowly, measured. "I've admired Morgan my whole life," he said, his tone quiet now. But somewhere along the way, admiration became comparison. Freeman didn't speak. He just watched. De Niro took a breath. And comparison became resentment. And maybe I didn't even notice. The studio was still. The host lowered their cue cards. Nothing on them applied anymore. De Niro continued. "He played God. I played gangsters. He got awards. I got applause. Somewhere in that mix, I lost track of what mattered." He looked down, his voice now barely a whisper. "So yes, I respect him. I just didn't know how to show it, without feeling smaller." Freeman slowly leaned forward. "Respect isn't given, Bob. It's revealed. Just like this moment." The young woman sat back down, tears in her eyes. She wasn't the only one. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't cold. It was reflective. Morgan Freeman adjusted his mic, not because it was loose, but because he needed a second. Then he said something few expected. "This isn't the first time we've clashed, just the first time on camera." The host raised an eyebrow. Freeman continued. "Years ago, we were at a fundraiser. Bob made a joke about the roles I choose. I let it slide." He paused. "But I didn't forget." De Niro looked stunned, genuinely. "I didn't even realize." "That's the point," Freeman replied. Some words leave marks the speaker never sees. The host leaned in. Why say all this now? Freeman looked out across the audience, his voice softened. Because silence is where bitterness grows, and I'm too old to carry bitterness. Someone in the back began to clap. Just one person, then a second. But Freeman raised a hand gently, stopping them. Don't clap, just remember, just. The silence was broken, not by the host, not by the cameras, but by a voice in the crowd. An older man stood near the back. No mic, no script, just words. I'm 73. I grew up watching both of you, but tonight, I think I saw you as people for the first time. Everyone turned. Even Freeman looked surprised. The man continued, I don't know what this moment will mean in the papers tomorrow, but in this room right now, it means something real. The host looked to the producers. They nodded. The cameras kept rolling. The man sat back down. Quietly, respectfully. But the dam had cracked. A younger voice chimed in next. Mr. Freeman, you made me rethink what it means to speak softly. And Mr. De Niro, thank you for staying in the room when you could have walked out. De Niro nodded, his eyes now wet. No actor's tears, real ones. Freeman leaned forward. People forget. We're still learning too. And in that moment, the show stopped being television and became a mirror. The host, who had been mostly silent for minutes now, took off their earpiece. They looked into the lens. No teleprompter, just presence. We had 10 more questions lined up, they said, but none of that feels right now. They looked at Freeman, then at De Niro. Is there anything either of you want to say without being asked? Freeman glanced at De Niro, who gave a subtle nod. Freeman started slowly. The world taught us to compete for roles, for relevance, even for respect. But the truth is, some of the loudest noise we make is just to cover our fear. De Niro added, and some of the roles we play, we don't take off when we leave the set. The audience was still. Some were crying, some simply listened. The host placed their question cards face down. Then maybe the real interview, they said softly, just happened in silence. There was no applause sign, no music cue, no shift in lighting, just 3 people, on a stage, saying things that would never be forgotten. The moment wasn't planned. Morgan Freeman turned directly to De Niro. No script, no performance, just truth. I forgive you, he said. Not for the cameras, not for the audience, but for himself. De Niro's mouth opened slightly, his hand moving toward his heart, almost instinctively. I don't even know what to say. Freeman smiled. You just said it. That's when the host leaned in and whispered something to the floor producer. Keep rolling, the producer said. This is the clip. Because in the hours to come, this was the moment millions would share. Not the whisper, not the confrontation. This. The camera framed both men side by side, and for the first time in decades, the audience didn't see Freeman the narrator or De Niro the rebel. They saw 2 men, tired, honest, vulnerable. And as the credits quietly rolled, the audience didn't applaud. They just stood, one by one, in silence. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is listen. The credits had rolled. The lights dimmed slightly, but no one moved. The host stood but didn't speak. De Niro sat with his hands folded, still, thoughtful, exhausted. Freeman remained seated too, back straight, eyes low. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't proud. He was simply present. No producers rushed the stage. No handlers came in. The audience remained seated, many with damp eyes, others with folded hands. What they had witnessed was not performance, not drama, but something rarer, 2 legends stepping out from behind the glass. Then a producer whispered from the wings, "We're still live overseas." The host stepped forward and asked quietly, "Would either of you like to say one last thing to the people still watching?" Freeman stood, slowly. The camera caught his every move. He looked at the crew, the crowd, De Niro. Then he turned to the lens, his voice low, measured, unshaking. No matter how many awards we earn, or how many spotlights we stand under, if we can't face the man in the mirror, we've won nothing. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was sacred. Robert De Niro stood next, not to speak, just to stand. He looked to the crowd, then to Freeman, and for a brief moment, he reached out and gently touched Morgan's arm. Just for a second. Then he whispered something, not into a mic, not for the world, just for the man beside him. Freeman nodded once. De Niro turned and walked off set. No wave, no spotlight, just footsteps. The audience didn't applaud. They didn't need to. They understood. Freeman remained behind, still in frame. The host stepped forward, eyes glossy. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for staying with us through one of the most unexpected, unscripted moments ever aired on this network. Then, quietly, the camera began to zoom out. Slowly, gently, as if even the lens knew this was no place for close-ups anymore. And in homes around the world, people sat still, remote in hand, heart in throat. Because somewhere in the mess of live television, something rare had happened. Two men had stopped acting and started feeling. The screen lingered on Freeman one last time. The host, now off camera, asked quietly, "Morgan, that whisper before the break, do you want to repeat it?" Freeman turned to the lens. He didn't hesitate. "I said, you don't know how to lose, Bob. That's why the world stopped clapping." He paused, then added something no one expected. "But tonight, maybe we both learned how to let go." The feed cut not with music, not with fanfare, but with a fade to black. And in that final second, across timelines and televisions, a moment of real humanity passed between two legends and all of us who watched. If this story made you pause, breathe, or reflect even for a moment, let it stay with you. In a world full of noise, this wasn't just a broadcast. It was a reminder that behind every screen, every name, every headline, there's a person. If that truth matters to you, we invite you to comment below, share your thoughts, and if you want more moments that speak, not shout, subscribe. Because what happened tonight wasn't performance. It was real, and real deserves to be remembered.